Okay, welcome back to our lecture on sensation and perception. The first thing I want to do here is to make sure you know the difference between sensation and perception. So some major differences. One, sensation is objective. For instance, let's take vision just for example. When we sense a stimulus, when we see it, the same energy plays on all of our sensory receptors. So for instance, when we look at this picture on the slide, the very same light waves are playing on all of our retinas. It does not differ from person to person. So sensation is objective. Now, perception is subjective. So perception is how we interpret what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, whatever, right? And that can differ in really interesting ways from person to person. For instance, one person may look at the picture on the slide and perceive drummers in this picture, another person praying mantises, another splatters of droplets ricocheting, and so on. Now, another important difference between sensation and perception, besides one being objective and one being subjective, okay, is that where it occurs. So sensation occurs at the receptor sites. Perception occurs in the brain, right? It's an upper level process in how we interpret what is it that we're seeing or hearing or smelling or tasting. So in order to be fully perceived, a stimulus must be sensed, attended, and interpreted. So not just one of these, not just two of them, all three of these are needed. So when we say sensed, we're saying the energy must play on your sensory receptors. When we say attended, it must capture your attention. And when we say interpreted, it must be assigned meaning. So that's that upper level process, right? Interpreting it, assigning meaning. So we're going to start with the very first requirement here. It must be sensed. You know, imagine a billboard that is camouflaged by its environment. You may never see it, right? In order for an ad to even have a chance of being perceived, it must first be sensed. The name of this process being sensed, in other words, the energy playing on sensory receptors, is sensation. Now, hopefully this is a review for you from Psych 101. So Psych 101 is a prerequisite for this class, and I'm quickly going to go over the stimulus and the receptors for each of the five sensory systems. And we're going to go through these rather quickly. And again, hopefully this is review for you, but in case not, here's your very quick review. So first off, we have the visual system, right? The sense of sight. And the stimulus is light waves. And you might remember that the receptors are in the retina. You know, the retina is that back lining of the eye. So behind the eye, there's a lining, and the retina is there. And within the retina, we have the receptors for the visual system, which are rods and cones. Rods and cones. The auditory system is the hearing sense, right? And the stimuli are sound waves now. Sound waves. So that's why your ear is shaped like a little satellite receptor, because it is catching sound waves. And the receptors are actually in the cochlea. So way in the inner ear, you have that snail-like structure that you studied in Psych 101. It's full of a liquid, but it's lined, right? The whole inside of it is lined. And that lining is called the basilar membrane. And it has the auditory cilia, cilia being like tiny, tiny, can't even see them, little hair cells, okay, lining the basilar membrane in the cochlea. Those are the receptor cells. Auditory cilia. And then we have the olfactory system, the sense of smell. And the stimulus is now soluble chemicals. So you smell your food because chemicals are breaking off from it, floating up into the air, and actually entering your nostrils. So the stimulus now is soluble chemicals. And the receptors are the olfactory cilia in the nasal membrane. So in the nasal membrane, you also have these little cilia cells, right, lining it, little hair-like cells. And they're called olfactory cilia. The gustatory system is the sense of taste, of course. And what's really interesting about this and the olfactory system is that they share the same stimulus, soluble chemicals. So soluble chemicals can dissolve into the air, or they can dissolve in your saliva, in your mouth. They actually do both in your mouth. So some of the chemicals actually, even if you do not eat with your mouth open, some of those chemicals will enter your nasal passage because as you probably know by now, scientists have discovered that back in your throat you have like 2 nostrils, okay? So access in there. But they share the same chemicals, right? Or the same stimulus, I'm sorry, soluble chemicals, the gustatory and the olfactory system. And the receptor cells for the gustatory system are interesting. A lot of people think they're the taste buds, and that's not technically correct. But you do have taste buds, and if you stick out your tongue and look in the mirror, they're quite visible, right? They're all the little bumps you see on your tongue. But around each of those taste buds, there's something you can't see, which is called papillae trenches. And within these papillae trenches, you can think of it as a trench dug around each taste bud. This is kind of what captures some of those dissolved chemicals, land in there. And within those papillae trenches, you have your taste cells. So the taste cells are the receptors for the gustatory system. And then finally, we have the tactile system, which is the sense of touch. And the stimulus here is energy, but there's actually 3 different types of stimuli. So 3 different types of energy. Thermal energy, if you think about it, this is a sense of touch, right? What you can feel like through your skin. And so right now you can feel through your skin the temperature of the environment that you're in. So thermal energy would be like temperature energy. And then chemical energy. So if a drop of water landed on your hand, you would feel that, right? Even if you didn't feel it hit, you would feel that it was there. So chemical energy. And then mechanical energy. Mechanical is like touch. Somebody pushes you or touches your arm, or a lover kisses you. That's mechanical energy. Now, the sensory receptors for the tactile system are sensory neurons. So nerve cells, sensory neurons. Okay. Now we're ready to look at the process of sensation. So in order for an advertisement of any kind to be sensed, it must meet the potential consumer's absolute thresholds. And so, if we're talking vision, like for instance with a billboard, or if we're talking a radio ad, we're talking auditory. But, in order for an advertisement of any kind to be sensed, it must meet the potential customer's what is called absolute threshold. So the absolute threshold is the minimum level of a stimulus that is needed for an individual to experience a sensation. The lowest point at which someone can detect something. So consequently, advertisers need to make sure that, for instance, billboard messages are brief enough to be read in approximately 6 seconds. Actually, the rule of thumb here is the fewer words, the better. In fact, 6 words maximum. In a primary message, it should never exceed that on a billboard, and you can tell that this billboard here is creating a lot of confusion for people. I don't know if you can see that, but that's actually all small print over there, real picture. Yeah. Absolute thresholds are oftentimes called ATs, oftentimes referred to as just ATs. And ATs vary by species. So dogs tend to have much lower olfactory ATs than humans. Okay, so their sense of smell is far more acute. It also differs by gender. Women typically have lower ATs than men, and it differs by age. So children tend to have lower ATs than adults, especially when we get to older adults, because sensory receptors lose some sensitivity with age. Industries that are forced to include information they'd rather you not notice, like the side effect of drugs or warnings, must still make it readable by the average targeted consumer. That's a law. So if, for instance, they're targeting seniors, they must use at least a 16-point font in print. They also cannot reduce the volume of an auditory ad when presenting this type of info that they're required but don't want you to hear, like the side effect of drugs. So what do marketers do instead? For instance, in TV ads, you might have noticed they increase the speed quite often. Another important sensory threshold is the ability to detect changes in relative levels of a stimuli. So Weber's just noticeable difference, and this again, oftentimes referred to as the initials, but in print, unlike ATs, it's in small letters, lowercase letters, with periods like you see it here on the slide. So J and D is oftentimes referred to that way in speech. So Weber's just noticeable difference. Weber is the psychologist came up with this, who studies sensation perception. And just noticeable difference is the amount of incremental change required for a change to be detected. So for example, the number of pounds you must put on for your friends to notice that you've gained weight, or the degree to which you must raise your voice in a crowded restaurant for your companions to hear you. It's important for marketers to study absolute thresholds and J&Ds of sensation and perception for a number of reasons. For instance, if you want to modernize your logo, you want it to be worthwhile, so you want it to be above J&D, but not too different. You still want to capitalize on those previously established things like brand recognition. You know, Coca-Cola really achieved this well in this example of their old and their new classic can. It's also important that consumers notice your sales. What good is it to have a sale if people don't notice? Okay? Weber discovered that a J&D is systematically related to the initial stimulus intensity. And this is called Weber's law, that the J&D is systematically related to the initial stimulus intensity. So in a way that you can calculate it, you can predict it. Okay? So this is called Weber's law, not to be confused with Miller's rule. Okay, which was what from a prior lecture? Do you remember? It's a number of pieces of information we can hold in working memory. So kudos if you remembered that. Marketers don't usually have time to measure this relativity with every product, so they usually use the pretty safe rule of thumb, which has been found to be 20%. So if somebody tells you to use Weber's law, like on a test, you can use it informally in this way by just using 20% instead of going through an equation that is beyond the scope of this class. Okay, so and this is what is routinely done in marketing. So if a grocer marks down a $2 can of soup to $1.60, customers will usually notice. But not if the grocer reduces the $10 package of steaks by the same 40 cents. Okay, what would the steaks need to be marked down to? Pause the video for a minute and then turn it back on, see if you got the answer, which is $8. Interestingly, people are sometimes predictably irrational when it comes to such relativity. Many are willing to cut out a 20-cent coupon for a $1, even a $2 item. But it's really hard to find someone willing to do the same amount of work, cut out a coupon for 20 cents off a large screen TV, even though the effort, the time, and the savings are identical. So this is one of the books in your recommended reading list. And if you have not discovered this yet, it's under handouts on Blackboard. And I think you're really going to want to take a look at this. And again, it's just recommended reading. It's not required for the class at all. But if there's only one book on this whole list that you end up getting and reading, this one would probably be the one you would most enjoy. It's really fun. It's a super easy read. It's packed with fun research, but really fun research. And I'll tell you something, it's a really good gift to give to other college students because it's just fun. Okay, so some of the books on that reading list are a little more difficult than others, but you can read the little blurb by them that I wrote on each of these, and you can find something for somebody at every level. So not just for yourself, but for gifts also. But Predictable Irrationality is a book by Dan Ariely that is the most fun one on your list.